Hello and welcome to this session hosted by MCCIA, Marana Chamber of Commerce. I am Amit Paranspe, co-chair of the IT committee. We have a special guest with us today, Dr. Mayur Datar. Mayur is a good friend. He is also the chief data scientist at Flipkart. Prior to that, he served in various roles, primarily as a top researcher at Google for many years. Before that, he did his PhD at Stanford. And prior to that, he was the President's Gold Medalist at IIT Bombay. So he comes with a very interesting and rich experience. And we are hoping to learn from him today about the various use cases and applications of AI. I know there's a lot of discussion going on about AI at various levels, and who better than Mayur to demystify some of these things for us, as well as give some actual interesting examples. So, Mayur, let's get right to it. Uh, Before we get to actual examples, I know this is a question that you must be getting all the time, but for the purpose of this session, I think it would be good if you can summarize it for us. Can you briefly mention or explain to a layman, what exactly is AI at a 10,000 or at a 50,000 foot level, so that we can explain it to a common technical person who's not necessarily versed with computer science or computer engineering.
Sure. Thank you, Amit. First of all, it's always a pleasure to be part of the MCCI conversations. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you. Coming to your question, at a very high level, AI is about making sense out of the data and forming patterns to be able to make judgments or make take decisions about various situations. This could be simple tasks like cognition, just like a baby would, when presented with a bunch of examples like this is an apple, this is an orange, and over time the baby learns. So that the next time, when, or maybe the 10th time or the 15th time, when you present an apple to the baby knows that this is an apple. It knows that this is a red color, right? So simple tasks like that to more complex ones where obviously machines are better than humans at number crunching and therefore can deal with lots of data and come to a pattern. Now, of course, all of this has become exciting and people are talking about it because this formation of patterns and this number crunching is actually leading to something useful, which I know is what we are going to be talking about in the rest of the conversation. But taking decisions on behalf of a product. So automated decision making, optimization is where these patterns and these functions that we have learned are useful. And that is what, to a large extent, artificial intelligence or machine learning is about.
I think that's a good starting point, Mayur. And yes, I think we want to talk about a lot of the use cases in various application domains. But before we get there, I think there is one point that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and which is these kind of algorithms, these kind of problem solving approaches, which is looking at data, learning from data, have been around for at least a few decades, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we have talked about them. Uh, there were other names as well, like expert systems in the 80s. But some of these concepts are not totally new. So, what exactly has changed in the last five, I would say, or 5 to 10 years? Actually, mostly in the last less than 5 years, that this has suddenly come to the forefront. Then, what is it? Is it have we had some breakthrough algorithms? Is it to do with hardware becoming very powerful? Is it
Yeah,
to do with a lot of data
great.
being available? What is it?
Yeah, great question. And actually, a little bit of everything that you just talked about. You're absolutely right that many of these algorithms, many of these techniques have been around for many decades now. Like starting from, I would say, 1930s, 1940s, you've had the foundations of AI, machine learning in what we call statistics today, right?
Mhm.
Techniques like linear regression have existed, and to this day they are being used with tremendous success. So in that sense, it's not like it's a new field that suddenly has come out. But like you said, I believe there's a trifecta that has come together over the last decade or maybe 2 decades, which has led to kind of a surge in applications and all the excitement that is there in this field. And this trifecta is basically about one, computing hardware becoming cheap, computing hardware and storage, of course. So when I say hardware, it includes storage. The amount of money that you need today to store terabytes or petabytes of data, and of course the computing power that you need in terms of petaflops, megaflops, and things of that sort to crunch to this data is very cheap today. I think everyone knows about Moore's law. Then you have the resurgence of consumer internet companies like your Googles, Facebooks, Amazons, Netflix, and so on and so forth, who took advantage of this cheap compute and cheap storage and started collecting data about their users and how their users interact with their products. And then they started applying these algorithms and techniques to better their products. And the last part of the trifecta, so we covered two of them, which is Moore's law and the cheap hardware and cheap compute. The second one was massive amounts of data being collected by companies all across the world, led by the consumer internet companies. And finally, it's not exactly a new algorithm, but I would say it's a reinvention of an old algorithm, namely neural networks. So even neural networks have been around for many, many years, but I'm sure some of you and the folks who have done computer science have learned about neural networks. But when we learned about them, we always studied a neural network with 100 neurons and 3 layers or 4 layers, etc. Right? But today, what has happened is that around 2010, a professor by the name of Geoffrey Hinton from U Toronto collaborated with folks from industry to start this field called deep learning. It was basically taking neural networks, but making them much, much, much bigger. So you're talking about millions of nodes, billions of parameters, and neural networks that are today hundreds of layers deep. Now, what happens is when you add so much of expressiveness to these neural networks, they can start doing things which are non-trivial. Some of the early successes that we saw with neural networks was in the field of image sciences, namely exactly the example that I described to you earlier, the ability to see an image and make sense out of it, to tag it, and so on and so forth. Since then, there have been many areas, including speech recognition, neural machine translation, then there is comprehension, etc., where these deep neural networks, or deep learning as it is called, has become very successful. And that has led to some very non-trivial applications which have very real business use cases. So that's the third part of the trifecta that I believe has led to this upsurge in the interest in data sciences.
And I think these three areas have come together at an interesting point of time, and the consonance of all of these coming together has, as you just described, have led to us solving an entirely new category of problems that even 5 years back seemed unsurmountable. Just, theoretically we could solve them, but practically we thought the kind of image processing results that we see around us today, identification of facial recognition and all. It's just magic. Even from a few year back standpoint. Now let's.
But just on that particular thing, you mentioned about facial recognition. Facial recognition specifically was solved earlier, even before the area of deep learning. And because it was such an important application, people had custom algorithms to do facial recognition. But you're right that today you don't need that custom algorithm. You can just throw a deep learning at it and it becomes useful. But I'll take that example a little bit and give you a slightly different example in the area of image analysis. Today there are startups which look at images of fruits and vegetables and can do automatic sorting for you and price the vegetable for you. So by looking at potatoes, it can tell you, are these potatoes good? What should be the right price for me to pay for it, right? So this is a great example where you can look at the kinds of defects that are there in vegetables, fruits, and so on and so forth. And today that is possible only because of deep learning, because otherwise, writing custom algorithms for each, a separate one for potato, separate one for apple, and another one for watermelon would have been just too much work and not cost effective. But because this technology has made it easy and cheap, you'll find applications like this that I just described.
Right. I mean, just summarize what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But the fundamental difference between the deep learning and especially the long layers that you're talking about, and the millions and billions of parameters that you're talking about, versus how we solved some of these problems, like image recognition, just a few years back. Those were, to use a technical term, hard-coded set of rules that were fed into the system, fed into the computer. And if the problem was able to fit in those rules, it could solve it. Now, what we are doing with this new approach is you're not really giving any rules. You're asking the system to figure out the rules for itself.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think that's the beauty of some of these newer.
Yes. I think just to rephrase it in a slightly more technical terms, what you're calling as rules are what is referred to in the community as feature extraction.
Okay.
So when it comes to facial recognitions, earlier we used to write custom code to identify where the eyes are, where's the nose, where's the mouth, and then the distance between them. So these are very custom built, hand built features, and there were other features as well in the image world. But today, these multiple layers do this feature extraction automatically for you, and therefore you don't have to worry about it, and it's much faster today.
Right. I think image processing is a huge field by itself. But let's jump to something that is close to what you're doing right now, which is e-commerce. And e-commerce has been a huge growth area, and especially over the last few months of lockdown worldwide, we have seen it grow even more, and especially has added a new value add that when many of the stores were shut down or not easily accessible, we could order all these things. So e-commerce is clearly a big growth area for the world, and creates a very interesting set of problems. So specifically e-commerce, the area that you're working at Flipkart, where do you see AI at work? What are the interesting kind of problems that you're solving today and you hope to solve in the next few years?
Great. So, like you said, I work at Flipkart, and which is the leading e-commerce company in India. I tell this to people that to an outside person, e-commerce might look like an app or a website where you can purchase products and you get them delivered home. But internally, when you look at what goes into making an e-commerce platform or e-commerce marketplace, I sincerely believe that it's almost like having 5 or 6 different industries under one roof. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at our logistics arm or eCart, it's a separate company in itself. Correct. And it's the largest supply chain in India today, right? People don't realize that. Then you have advertising on our platform, and we are, I forget the exact number, 3rd or 4th largest digital marketing platform in India, right? Then you have cataloging, which is all about, how do you get information about the products from the sellers, and make sure that it is truthful, it does not violate the norms, etc., and making it available to the serving systems. Then you have your storefront, right, which is basically all the interfaces that the customers interact with, your app, your website, and so on and so forth. Each of these in itself are huge areas and could potentially become an industry in itself, in my opinion. So in short, it's a very rich domain in terms of problem statements. And you have challenges, technical challenges or problems arising from supply chain, warehousing, optimizing placement of goods there, route optimization, to you have your predictive analytics tasks in advertising. How do you predict the relevant content to show to users, predicting your click-through rate and conversion rate of users for these ads, search, and making sense of what users are typing in that search box, so that the right set of products ranked in the right order can be shown to them, and so on and so forth, right? So at any given time, I can, literally list 50 problem statements to you with very rich domain, right? What I mean by that is to solve these problems, you're going to be applying techniques right from deep learning to simple decision trees to logistic regression. So you'll probably span the entire spectrum of the various techniques or algorithms that are there today in machine learning, in artificial intelligence, and they come from the various domains of e-commerce. So that's a kind of a brief answer, right? I think this is probably a good segue into what the way I categorize, and it's just my personal categorization of what AI/ML can do for us, right? And I have four big buckets, the way I see it, right, of what AI/ML can do to us. So so I'll first list them and then give examples, right? One is cognition. Second is language understanding. Third is optimization. And the fourth is predictive analytics or classification. So those are the big buckets in which I see AI/ML being useful. So what is cognition, right? Cognition literally means making sense of what you see and hear, right? So your optical character recognition or OCR, image analysis, and when I say image, I include image and video as well in it. So analyzing it for various tasks to make sense out of it, to moderate it, right? Like I'll give you an example from the e-commerce space. Sellers upload many thousands of images, many tens of thousands of images on our platforms, product images, right? And it's not only sellers. Today, when you write a review for a product on Flipkart, you can even upload an image corresponding to that particular product. Now, we cannot just blindly take that image and show it to our customers, right? It has to go through an entire pipeline of moderation. So, where we take a look at whether, it meets certain quality criteria in terms of the resolution of the image, whether it has the right focus and so on and so forth, right? Then comes, making sure that it does not have any objectionable content like, profanity, nudity, and things of that sort, to making sure that it is not violating any of the government norms. So, for example, making sure that the Indian flag is not represented in such a way that it is demeaning of it and so on and so forth. Right? And not just Indian flag, even
any country's flag.
Any country's flags, or even images of gods and so on and so forth, because you don't want to hurt the sensitivities of your customers and so on and so forth. So that was one example. But beyond that, in cognition includes face recognition, making sense out of a satellite imagery, robotics process automation, right? When somebody uploads millions of forms to you, and let's say these are scanned and sent to you, can you extract what the people have written from that form, and associating the values with the right fields, etc., right? So that is the whole area of cognition, making sense of what you see, what you hear, right? And part of cognition is automatic speech recognition, which means hearing a sound and transcribing it, assuming it's somebody is speaking in a particular language. Then we talked about language understanding, right? What is language understanding? So that includes your translation, of course. That's a big area there. But basically, when I speak to you, understanding what I'm saying, and simple things, right? So if I'm saying that, Amit, please pass me the water, you understand what it means, right? In the context of a particular domain, and this the biggest application area for this is chatbots, right? So that, let's say this is a chatbot for making or taking care of customers' complaints or queries post an order is placed. So that is the context, right? So when somebody says, where is my order? We know that understanding the intent of the user, saying that he's trying to understand when his order will be delivered to him, or as of today, where is it in the supply chain, right? How far is it, which location it is, etc., right? So understanding the intent of what the user is saying in a particular context is what I refer to as natural language understanding. And an example of that is search query understanding, right? When people type in keywords in Google, or they type in long queries in our search box, making sense of that, right? So that is part of language understanding. Then you have your classical predictive analytics, right? Where you're trying to classify certain things. You're given examples of good, bad, and when a new example is given, you need to say whether this is good or bad. What are the typical examples of good or bad, right? Every second, millions of credit card swipes happen across the world, right? And depending on the context of the credit card transaction, right? What is the location? How much amount is being is being charged, and so on and so forth, right? So you're trying to see whether it is a fraudulent credit card transaction or not. And again, this is an age-old problem, but it's a classical classification problem, right? Then classification is typically binary, like a good or bad, or two classes, right? But you could have an entire, you could also try to put a number on it. So for example,
scoring, some kind of a scoring.
Exactly, some kind of a scoring, right? If I take a loan from you, can you put a probability on whether I'll default on my loan, right? That is the classical application of fintech today, or credit scoring in general. Or whenever I underwrite you an insurance, right, whether it is a travel insurance, whether it is a life insurance, we try to estimate the probability of the payout. But will I have to pay out the insurance to you, right? So, so estimating that particular quantity, this is all part of what I refer to as predictive analytics or classification.
Right.
And the final part is your classical optimization, more like the operations research, where you're trying to do route optimization.
The whole supply chain, which is the key backend for e-commerce companies.
Exactly. Or even how to stock, place your products in the warehouse, so that you optimize the time it takes for you to pick up products that constitute a particular basket, or that your robots can do automatically, right? So that they travel minimum distances. So optimization. So those are 4 big areas, and I've given examples of each of them, which I feel today account for a large part of what AI/ML is. Again, it's a rough classification or categorization, which I personally use. Not everyone might stick to it.
No, I think this is excellent, because I think this puts into context of various buckets in terms of how do you look at AI/ML at work, right? I mean, people have some broad idea, but this helps us to put actual concrete examples in each of these 4 categories. Let me specifically get to the last category first, because that's something that I have had some personal experience in my past life, over a decade back when I worked in supply chain, or actually even 2 decades back. Of course, at that time, we were trying to solve some of these similar problems, not for e-commerce, but for consumer goods companies and high-tech companies and semiconductor companies and retailers. But essentially similar problems, what to stock, where to stock, how to predict demand, how to look at the variability of demand, how to manufacture, where to manufacture. Now, obviously, the scale of problem in e-commerce has become many, many times more than what we were dealing with in the past, right? But 10 years back or 20 years back, we were, again, going back to our earlier discussion, we were using more traditional techniques of solving these problems, traditional optimization, traditional operations research techniques. Specifically from a supply chain management standpoint, and this also relates to some of our audience from MCCIA, which is more manufacturing based, right? I want to use that as a segue to get into supply chain and manufacturing, and how do you see this area evolving? How can AI/ML transform this area, even for small players, not necessarily the humongous large retailers like Walmart or like Flipkart e-commerce, or some of the big consumer goods players like Pepsi or Frito-Lay or Hindustan Lever, but more smaller players.
So I think there are 2 answers, right? Obviously, one aspect is the fact that the classical techniques that you just mentioned, demand forecasting, facility location, etc., are still there, and they are still being used very successfully by many small and large players. So obviously, my advice to the small industries, small and medium industries who are part of the chamber, would be that to try and see whether you can use these techniques as long as you have the right data to try and optimize your processes, because there's a lot of cost savings to be made there if you can do it appropriately, right? And what has changed today is, although a lot of the age-old algorithms are still being used, what has changed today is that in some cases, people have successfully tried to apply deep learning or other such newer techniques to the same problems, like demand forecasting or time series forecasting is a classic example, right? ARIMA is an age-old technique from the statistics point of view, right? But today, very recently, there has been successes in applying deep learning to do this, to solve the same problem. And where it has shown improvements is areas where there is sparsity of data. So it learns patterns over many time series, as opposed to typically what you might have dealt with in classical things, where there are fewer time series, which are dense time series, where ARIMA does pretty well. So, so that's one aspect, namely old algorithms, and in some cases improvements over them to deal with challenges like sparsity and so on. But the other area which is not from this particular bucket, but other buckets where small and medium industries can benefit a lot are things like IoT. So they can use predictive analytics to figure out whether a particular piece of their machinery is performing well, whether it needs maintenance, and by thereby reducing the downtime of it, or thereby reducing the servicing costs of it, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that's one area where they can make a lot of sense. The other aspects are I've seen companies employ image analysis and so on to monitor their shop floors, monitor productivity of their employees, or it's not just for monitoring, but also to learn, which processes are giving better output, right? In that sense. So that's another area which is, optimizing your assembly lines or other things using image analysis. Is another area that I can think of that these guys can use. Like, remember I gave you that example of sorting of vegetables and so on and so forth, right? So if that can be done automatically without employing too many people, if it can be done at the edges, so if you could literally employ a machine in the fields to do this sorting and source your fruits, vegetables, or whatever you're doing, it gives you a lot of, it saves a lot of cost, because then if there's a bad fruit, you don't even want it delivered to your plant where you're going to process it and so on and so forth, right? So that's another example.
Yeah, I think this is obviously a very broad area to talk about. I think we have about 5-10 more minutes. There are a few things I want to quickly touch upon, right? One is obviously we are living in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic, and none of us could have predicted how things would be right now, say if we were asked a year back, right? And it has clearly brought to the fore the whole healthcare and pharmaceutical area. I would really like to get some thoughts from you in both these, whether it's diagnostics, healthcare on one side, or drug discovery, pharmaceutical side, the chemical analysis side of it. How do you see AI play a role in that?
Yeah. On the first part, which is healthcare and analytics, there have been studies which look at all the data that hospitals collect about their patients, their vital signs, their medication, their pulse oximeter, their, all of that numbers, right? And predict whether a particular patient is going to go into code blue, or which means they're going to get a cardiac arrest or some life-threatening this thing, right? And such predictive analytics have shown good success. I know that some hospitals have been piloting these schemes, so that rather than rely on people, the nurses or other staff in the hospital to figure out whom you should pay more attention to, if you could let data do that, I think there's a lot of cost saving to be had there. You also, from an insurance perspective and from a healthcare industry perspective, right? What you want to also see is what kinds of treatments actually provide better outcomes. And a better outcome is not just about the patient getting well, but whether does it lead to repeat visits and things of that sort, right? So what processes or what medication, these kinds of predictive analytics can help us make decisions about, should we postpone a surgery or should we not postpone a surgery, right? What have been the outcomes if we postpone surgery versus not, right? Can this case be handled through medication? Because see, in the short term, it might look like a win. The guy, the symptoms go away, you're happy for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, but then later on again, the guy comes back with a bigger problem, and that might lead to a surgery, etc., right? So if you have enough data based on the symptoms and other things, you could let the machines make such decisions for you. On the drug discovery part, people have been looking at things like protein folding and other things to design drugs. And I think that's a very active area of research. I'm not an expert in that particular field, so I can't comment on what the latest developments have been. I know that, there's a lot of simulation that goes in to understand which structure of a particular chemical binds well to a known protein. And there you can use data science to do it. But, beyond that, I'm not too much aware of what the latest in drug design is.
Right. So I think we've talked a lot about data in pretty much the entire conversation, right? And I think data is the foundation of any analytics, but especially in AI ML when we're looking at large amounts of data. So I think I want to quickly touch upon that aspect, because while, again, going back to our MCCI audience primarily, while we do have manufacturing companies, we do have some IT and especially medium-sized and small-sized IT companies as well. And they would be very curious to know a little bit about it. Because whenever we talk about AI, even in big companies, right, like Flipkart or Google, right, we're looking at essentially two aspects. We're looking at the data science aspect, and we're looking at the data engineering aspect, right? I mean, at least that's one broad classification we look at. The way I look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong, data science is where you're really designing the core algorithms, the core decision structures, whereas data engineering is really the prep required to get, channelize, collect, sort large amounts of data coming in from different sources. How do you see the focus on these two areas in terms of number of people working in it, the kind of skills required, and can smaller and mid-sized companies play a role, if not in data sciences, at least on the data engineering aspects of it?
Great question. I love this question actually, because the short answer is that the industry on whole has underinvested in what you call as data engineering. And in fact, in my opinion, the success of companies like Google, Facebook, etc., largely, and not just them, those are the big names that we are aware of, but even other companies who have been successful in applying data science, they are successful because they have invested properly and they have invested early in the data engineering aspect of it. To quote the cliche, data is the new oil. I mean, and that is the fuel that runs all of these data science magic, right? So if that is not collected properly or is dirty, there's nothing you can do with it, right? In fact, I might argue that to a large extent, some of the techniques, algorithms in data science have been democratized. You don't need to code them up. It's push of a button. There are many platforms, on AWS, on Azure, on Google Cloud, etc., which will let you do simple techniques like predictive analytics, even some of these cognition techniques, etc., at little to no cost, right? So algorithms have been democratized. In fact, even some of the big models have been democratized. What is the biggest challenge is making sure that you collect your data in a proper way, you store it in the right fashion with the right kind of schema and so on. Make sure that there are no errors in your data capture. And if you can do that properly, then I think you have already, more than half the battle is won as far as making data work for you is concerned. And traditionally, I've seen companies not invest a whole lot in terms of people. People hear a lot about data science, but I think what the industry needs is as much, if not more, data architects and data engineers. And I think that's where we are falling short today.
And I think from a skill standpoint, what kind of skills do you think companies, and now I'm not talking about the manufacturing companies, but the IT companies that want to provide services around data engineering should be really looking at? I mean, clearly we are not looking at AI PhDs and things like that. But what are the kind of things? And even if people don't have a core computer engineering, computer science background, but good basic engineering background, which is what we see a lot of people today in our ITS industry as well, right? What do they need to do? Can you suggest some small courses or some quick online learning where they can become proficient at data engineering? Because I fully agree with you. I mean, that is where bulk of the requirements are going to be in the coming years.
Yeah, I think at a very high level, the skills that you need for data engineering are basically an extension of what people did with database systems. So your old RDBMS systems, right? If you're taking from there, how should data be organized? What should the schema be? And the new avatar of it in the new world, which is basically the semi-structured or NoSQL databases. So that understanding them, understanding the architecture of how data is stored there, how data is analyzed, your computing paradigms like MapReduce and so on, distributed systems architectures, because see, big data means that you cannot do things on a single machine, right? You need multiple computers coming together. So you're obviously in the realm of distributed computing. And in the case of distributed computing, you have your standard challenges like fault tolerance, leader election, and so on and so forth, right? So yes, some of these are core computer science capabilities. Now, you should know them if you're if you're coming up with new platforms or inventing them, but at least you should know the concepts of how it is done and how some of these existing platforms that are out there, what are they built on top of it, so that you can then deploy them for your clients customize them are some of the skill sets that you will need to learn. So, understanding Scala, understanding Hadoop, and understanding, underlying compute architectures like TensorFlow, etc., and being able to deploy them are some of the skill sets that I can think of.
I think this will be very useful for a good section of our audience. So I think we are almost out of time. Let me close on an interesting and a broad question. I think one thing that comes to mind for many people when they talk about AI and the future and has become popular for one big reason being Elon Musk, who sort of talked about it a lot, and which is self-driving cars, right? And I think it's gone through multiple hype cycles. I think we probably may be getting to some kind of sanity in that field. I think 5 years back, people thought that by 2020 we would have self-driving cars. Some people at least were thinking. Now it's clear we are not there. So let me end on a question or a set of questions that you can summarize in a couple of minutes. By 2025 or by 2030, right? What do you think would surprise us in AI? I mean, it's almost like, we would just not expect it to happen, but it happened. Like, I mean, in 2015, if we would have thought of the kind of things that AI did in, say, gaming, for example, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Go or some of these games. What would be a big surprise in 2025? Obviously, we're not going to hold you to it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
which one you think is overhyped as well?
Okay. Yeah.
So basically, a positive and a negative view
Sure.
of AI for the next 5 years.
Yeah. Of course, I'm going to be gazing into a crystal ball here. So I'm glad you said you're not going to hold me to it. I think that where I feel I'm most optimistic about is cognition. I think we've made great strides there. There's a lot of application areas for cognition, and packaging them into the right kind of robots. And when I say robots, these are not, your walking, talking.
Not the physical robots.
Not the physical robots that you've necessarily seen in, the Hollywood movies. But basically, some version of it that is automating the processes for you, doing some very well-defined, small yet concrete tasks. I think is where I think we'll see a lot of success. And yes, there might be some versions of it which are like those walking, talking robots. You might see people assisting patients in hospitals or elderly care centers, etc., which can, so because you're talking 2025, 2030, you might see one or two avatars of them, but you already have robots in completely dark warehouses, right? I think that's where the field is going. So similar robots for many other tasks, whether it is drones for delivery, I'd call that as a form of a robot, basically, right?
Or personal assistants. I mean, that's a big area.
Exactly, or personal assistants. I think that's one area where I feel we'll be surprised at how far we have come and how this feels like almost science fiction to us, right? I think in terms of where there was a big hype and it may not go through, I think there could be many areas. I really find it hard. I do believe that at some point self-driving cars will happen. I think there are many challenges to it. The challenge is not just purely from a technology standpoint, I feel. So I don't want to write it off. It will get delayed, but I think it will happen, and I think it's required because pre-COVID, the way things were happening in terms of congestions on roads, etc., it was imperative that we get more utilization out of our roads, right? So I think that was one of the reasons that some of the tech luminaries invested in this technology. So I see it happening. I don't want to call it this thing. So call me an optimist. I don't want to name any technology I think is overhyped or flop. But I told you things that I'm more bullish about.
I think that's a good note to end. You're definitely an optimist, and we would like to come back to you soon to talk about some of these areas. I know we have limited time. There are a lot of other things we can discuss. Maybe we'll do a follow-up in a couple of months. But on the positive side, you're definitely highlighting the role of personal assistants or specific robots for specific tasks. I think I agree with you. I think that's. I also think that will be a huge area for us, and it will ultimately go and help us in various areas. So So on that note, thanks a lot, Mayur. I think this was really useful for a variety of our audiences. I mean, we have multiple constituencies that we were trying to address in this. So on that note, thanks a lot, and look forward to see you on the MCCI forum again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you, Chambers. Yeah.